So it's no secret that Jennifer Rubin of the Washington Post isn't a fan of Bernie Sanders. For years now, she's let that be known on social media and in her pieces for the Washington Post. But her most recent piece is an attack on Bernie Sanders, chock full of misinformation, specifically about his foreign policy. Now, before we start, I have to let you know that her piece here is based largely off an interview Bernie Sanders did with the New York Times. So it's sort of secondhand information. And what Rubin's thesis is, if you can call it that, is that Bernie Sanders is at least tolerating left-wing dictatorships, that he's unwilling to criticize dictatorships that Rubin feel are left-wing. And she cites two broad examples. The first one is Bolivia, and she suggests that Evo Morales was a left-wing dictator and that Bernie Sanders is unwilling to criticize him and offers him support, and cites this interview as an example. But here's the thing. On two key fronts, Rubin is wrong. First, from my perspective and many others' perspectives, Morales was not a dictator and was never a dictator. And it was the people who replaced him through an anti-socialist, anti-indigenous coup that are the dictators, that are enabling anti-democratic tendencies in Bolivia and in the region. But the fact is that while Bernie Sanders certainly does praise Morales, he does criticize him here. I actually don't agree with Bernie because I feel Morales did nothing wrong. But Bernie does suggest that Morales made a mistake, whether he was allowed to or not, in seeking an additional term as Bolivia's president. And that Bernie said that I wouldn't have recommended doing that even if I supported Morales and his project. So whether you agree with Bernie or not on that particular issue, it's Bernie offering criticism of Morales, the quote-unquote supposed left-wing dictator, Evo Morales. But it's on China specifically where Rubin really goes off the rails. First, she tries to categorize China as a left-wing dictatorship. And most of the people I know on the left, myself included, but many others, certainly see China as a dictatorship, but not as a left-wing dictatorship. We see it more as a capitalist dictatorship, as a formation of state capitalism, where corporations and the Chinese government have partnered to exploit the environment and to exploit workers and not actually build a system that's predicated on the equal sharing of goods and resources and opportunities, which you might see from a left-wing government, democratic or otherwise. But beyond that, she gives a woeful misreading about what Bernie Sanders says and doesn't say in this interview. She seems to suggest that Bernie Sanders is unwilling to call Chinese leader Xi Jinping a dictator. But the thing is, Bernie Sanders at the top of the question, the top of the goddamn question, says, yeah, I do, in response to the question, do you think he's a dictator? And then below, says it again, says China is a dictatorship. So Rubin's trying to create arguments and create points that just don't exist. Again, right here in the New York Times interview, in this first paragraph on the China question, Bernie Sanders says, yes, I think that Xi Jinping is a dictator. It's literally the first thing he says in the gosh darn paragraph. And then he goes on to explain that China has made notable progress. But lest it be thought that Bernie Sanders is defending and championing China, he finishes up that segment with an argument that despite all that, China is a dictatorship. It does not respect democracy. It does not respect human rights. It does not respect workers' rights and their ability to form meaningful and independent trade unions, labor unions. And as such, Bernie Sanders is offering notable criticism. Bernie Sanders isn't offering support to China. And if anything, he's offering meaningful criticism of China from the left on the question of workers' rights, human rights, and democratic rights. That's the basic truth here. So Jennifer Rubin's piece, criticizing Bernie Sanders for quote-unquote supporting or not criticizing left-wing dictators, is a bold-faced lie. And if it's not a lie, it shows that Jennifer Rubin just plain didn't read her goddamn sources. She didn't do the interview here. She's basically poaching an article, poaching a column off an interview Bernie did with another major news source, the New York Times. And Bernie's answers are laid out clear as day. When she says Bernie Sanders can't affirmatively say that Xi Jinping is a dictator or that China is a dictatorship, she is lying or she didn't read it. because it says it right there. But this is about more than Jennifer Rubin and her really, really shoddy column. Shoddy at best and misleading at worst. This is about how the center and the right have no real way of criticizing Bernie Sanders. They've tried it in so many ways. And what happens is, when they can't criticize him legitimately, they can't criticize him through meaningful discussions about his policy and legacy and record and worldview, they just lie. They just make stuff up. So they'll say that Bernie Sanders supports or at least tolerates left-wing dictatorships, when the countries they cite are either not dictatorships in Bolivia or are not left-wing dictatorships in China. And at the end of the day, Bernie Sanders has offered criticism of both of those instances in the very piece that Rubin says he doesn't offer criticisms in. That's what happens. They can only lie about Bernie Sanders because the truth is that he's by far the best person to become the next president of the United States, both on foreign policy and domestic policy. But here's the thing from our perspective. This is again a sign we're winning. The left is winning. Bernie supporters are winning. Democratic socialism is winning, because when they have to lie to attack us, it means that our actions, our beliefs, our goals, our policies, our worldview is fundamentally correct, or is at least unassailable. If they can only come at us with falsehoods and with misinformation, that means that we can continue to go to the people with our truth and win them over one by one.